Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathleen Weber, and I'm the pastor here. Welcome to Trinity United Methodist Church. I want to thank Earth Ministry and Jesse Dye, as well as Robin Everett from Sierra Club for hosting this workshop, and we look forward to learning a lot more. And we are so pleased to have Mayor McGinn here tonight. As you all know, he's been certainly a leader in fighting against the coal export, and so we are glad that you can be here to speak to us. And I asked a little bit because I don't know all that you've done in this arena, so I learned so much from Robin. But as you all may know, but I did not know that he created and leads the Leadership Alliance Against Coal that represents over 75 elected leaders and tribal members across the region, coordinating their opposition to coal exports. So thank you very much for all you have done and continue to do on this issue, and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. And I really appreciate being invited. You know, I know many of you probably know my background already, but I was very involved in the Sierra Club for years. And, you know, and I was very involved in my neighborhood, my Greenwood Community Council too. So I've always just believed in the power of people to organize, to create change. And, you know, I still believe that as mayor. And I was going to say, I used to think it was important for the community to organize, to pressure elected leaders to do the right thing. Now that I'm mayor, I absolutely know that it's true. You know, you think you have power as a mayor, but you really discover that the ability to accomplish things depends upon, you know, that there being that broad support out in the public to, you know, to challenge, you know, the status quo, to say we're prepared to make changes, we're prepared to look at doing things a different way. And on this issue, you know, it just really draws it all out in stark relief. And for me, climate change was an issue that when I was in the Sierra Club, I liked working on a lot of different issues, you know, whether it was wilderness or protecting wild rivers or, you know, alternative ways to get around. But climate change actually kind of galvanized me to get more serious about my work. And I can see some heads nodding in the room. It's just like this, and I believe this is one of the challenges of our time. Income inequality is a challenge of our time. How do we live together as a multicultural society? And climate change are huge challenges the city faces. And this city has always embraced, you know, figuring out how we can be a leader on the environment. So we are, you know, we have the first carbon neutral utility in the nation in Seattle City Light. Yeah, and that happened before I took office because of leadership. I don't want to claim credit for anything that's not mine here, right? And it actually belongs to all of us. It belongs to Seattle's viewpoints. In fact, a number of years ago, as we think about that, we chose not to buy any more coal from the Centralia power plant, our one coal power plant in the state, and now the state has decided that it will close down into the future. I mean, that's a huge, huge victory for the state because it's one of the leading sources of carbon pollution in the state, you know, for just one thing. So, but you can even look further back in Seattle taking a leadership role or being willing to stand apart on a tough issue. And I went to work for a U.S. congressman a long time ago, Congressman Jim Weaver, Democrat from Eugene, Oregon. And what they said back in the 70s and early 80s was, if the region's going to continue to grow, we have to have nuclear power plants. We've used up all of our hydropower. There's no other alternative. And you care about jobs, don't you? You care about economic growth, and we have to have more nuclear power plants. And the argument was made, similar to the argument being made now about coal, how can you be against jobs? How can you be against growth, right? And they actually signed up electric utility districts around the whole region to buy power from these nuclear power plants. And then when the power plants went bankrupt, largest municipal bond default in this nation's history, Washington Public Power Supply System, whoops, aptly named, there was a $4 billion hole to fill. And about the only people who were making money at that point were the lawyers litigating over who was going to hold the bag. Would it be the bondholders? Would it be the electrical utilities? What would happen? And there's many instructive points about it, but another one is there actually was a better way. We did have a better way. We have grown for the last, 30 years since whoops. We have thrived, as a region with less electrical power use per person, per capita use continues to go down. It turns out conservation and efficiency works, and everybody poo-pooed it. You can't do that. And we kind of hear the same arguments today. Well, we'll need coal for our energy, right? And how can you be against jobs and you're not being practical? Well, I think we all know that continuing to pump carbon into the atmosphere isn't very practical. And we have to find better ways to do it. And I look at our city's leadership. I mentioned carbon neutral utility. We're working on expanding electrified rail transit to connect our neighborhoods. We're adopting electric cars at a very high rate. We're now the 5th nation in the city where less than 50% of the people take a single occupancy vehicle to work. I mean, we keep adopting. We have energy efficient buildings, some of the most energy efficient buildings in the world. All of those gains would be wiped out if we take massive amounts of coal that's in the Powder River Basin and bring it through here, send it to China to be burned. And I want to say something else about, I've been to China as well recently. About a year ago, I went and visited. I remember getting off in Beijing. It was like a toxic soup. It was unbelievable. And I know it's their political system is perhaps not as robust democratically to respond to constituent pressure for change. But I'll tell you something, even in, that type of setting, if you can't make your air clean to breathe, the rulers are going to be in trouble. I mean, that's just really fundamental, and they see that. So it's fascinating in China. We actually went and visited with their electrical utility folks. They've got, they only have a couple of utilities, and they're really big. And the one we visited with is like doing the most amazing work on solar power and smart grid, but they're also building lots of new coal power plants. So they're simultaneously doing really good stuff and really bad stuff. But even in China, there has to be that pressure from the public to change. So our job here is we have looked at the local issues. We've looked at the effects on our crossings. We are locally, and this is through up and down cities throughout the region, and that will have negative economic effects and negative traffic effects. We are beginning to look into health effects, and there's a study being done at the UW where they're taking a look at, because 2% of the coal doesn't make it from one end to the other. It comes off the trains. And we've looked at all of those, and we're looking at those things as well. There's a host of negative effects that are negative economically, health-wise, as well as environmentally. And when you add all of that up and you think about where our real economic strength is, I mean, we should be exporting our green building knowledge to China. So they need fewer coal power plants, not exporting our coal. And that's one that'll create more jobs for us, than a coal handling facility without all of the negative effects. So we know there's a better path. The challenge, of course, is there's a lot of big money behind this. And the thing that'll make a difference, and I'm circling right back to where I started, is organizing. So that's why you're here. That's why the Sierra Club's engaged, is to talk about how you can organize to make a difference. And I want to just say the way in which the people of Seattle have responded to this, and you're not alone, right? We're organizing at a leadership level, but I had the opportunity to meet with tribal leaders. They invited me up to meet with them, and I went up to Marysville to meet with them on the Tulalip Reservation, and there were leaders from all of the tribes that are north of us, and they were resolved. There was no buy-off from them. They were not going to sacrifice their traditional fishing grounds and their traditional places to these coal trains. And they said, to me, let's partner. Let us partner together and build a broader coalition. And that's what we set out to do. And now we have 75 leaders, municipal leaders, tribal leaders from across the state. And we have Governor of Oregon and Washington have opened up to do a much broader analysis. So there's a lot more to be done. Industry has their paid flax, and they're going to go out there and keep saying it's about jobs and it's really the right thing to do for the environment because, and they'll make up some reason. They'll say all of that, and they'll have more money, right? But what we got on our side is, in addition to good arguments, we got good hearts and we got good people, and we're going to organize. So I just want to say thank you all for coming out, and thank you all for supporting the Sierra Club. And I'm really proud to be mayor of a city that is leading, not just now, but has led for decades on pointing the way to a better environmental future. So thank you for that.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Robin Everett. I'm with the Sierra Club, which is part of Power Pass Coal, the folks that are trying to stop coal exports. Today, I thought I'd do a little bit of a different kind of presentation. I think almost all of you have probably been to a presentation by me by now on coal exports. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the bigger issues behind what we're dealing with and less about some of the nitty-gritty stuff. But there will be question and answer period afterwards. And so if you do have questions that are more of the, nitty-gritty stuff that I'm not getting into, be happy to take those. And so I wanted to start out by saying that, we've been talking about how coal exports threatens our air and our water and our communities for the past couple years. But it also threatens our values and our democracy and our children's future. And so that's kind of the theme of what I wanted to talk about tonight. So I'm going to start with the Big Daddy and piggyback off of what Mayor McGinn was talking about and about our climate issue. So this map represents if all the coal terminals were built. It's a little bit less now because we keep stopping them, so that's kind of nice. But we've stopped 3 out of the 6 so far. So this was done when there was 6. So it's a little bit less now, but it's still at around, I don't know, at least over 100 million tons. Probably about 110 or so million tons. And so 145 million tons being burned would be the equivalent of every single person in those states in the red in their cars for a year. So we would have to get all of those states to go car-free to balance out the emissions. So maybe we can take off Utah now and another state or two, but you get the picture. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Just one of these proposals would burn as much carbon into the air as we currently do in the entire state of Washington. That's industry, that's coal plant, that's cars, that's buildings. This is a huge carbon nightmare and climate nightmare. And with the climate problems come threats to some of the most valued treasures that we have here in the Northwest. And one of them is our forests. We are seeing year after year after year more intense fires, more frequent fires. We're putting way more public dollars into firefighting now. We're losing people's lives. The climate is projected to become unfavorable for Douglas fir for over 32% of its current range in Washington. Up to 85% of the range of some of the pine species are now currently out of their climate. It's bad, and it's only getting worse. And Chris Wilke with Puget Soundkeeper is going to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the issues that we're seeing around ocean acidification and our Puget Sound as it relates to coal and global warming. But I thought this was a really great quote from Governor Inslee this Earth Day. Once we had the canary in the coal mine, and now we have the oyster in the ocean. And boy, is that true. I mean, we currently cannot grow our own oysters in this state. We are shipping them to Hawaii so that they can be matured for their shells and then come back here. This is a business that we've been in for, longer than we probably can remember. And it's a business that's in real danger right now. Another piece of this issue is the Columbia River, and I haven't talked a lot about the Columbia River in previous forums, but the Columbia River is kind of iconic to the Northwest, right? And it's something that we all value and treasure. And I don't know if it's easy to tell, but that's a coal train going through the Columbia River. That's coal dust that's all coming up off the top of those cars there. There's impacts of the trains going through. There's also impacts of the Longview proposal that would be basically right at the mouth of the Columbia River. And when you combine the proposals that are in place right now, we're looking at 50 uncovered mile-and-a-half-long coal trains going through the Columbia River every single day. Every single day. And If you think about with the proposal in Oregon that includes barging coal down the river, we're looking at doubling the current barge traffic. And so combined with the barging and the trains, we're looking at 138 million tons of coal going through the gorge every single year, going through our wild and scenic area. One of the most inspiring things about this effort so far has been the amazing outpouring of opposition from tribal leaders all across the state. It started with the Lummi up at Cherry Point because their treaty rights are being threatened by building a 48 million ton terminal on their ancestors' grounds and in their water. But now we're looking at over 60 tribes across the region have come out in opposition to coal exports. And this is a picture of the totem pole journey that just concluded the other week. And they built this totem pole in opposition to coal exports in Montana. And they started with the Cheyenne and had a ceremony in Montana, and they moved their way along the rail route, down the Columbia River and up the I-5 corridor, and had ceremonies all along the way. And this is the final ceremony that they had up in Canada to mark their opposition and their solidarity with the tribes in Canada who are also in opposition to oil and coal. So this may not be the most easiest, link to make right away, but coal in general threatens our democracy. One of the major reasons why the Sierra Club got involved in working to shut down coal plant after coal plant after coal plant was 1, for people's health, 2, to protect the climate, and 3, to get this big, dirty money off of our backs and stop strangling hold our Congress and our presidents and our leaders. And so this directly ties in with all of the work that so many of us are doing on getting money out of politics, on making sure that our democracy is upheld. I have my laser. I have pictures of the Koch brothers there. They are responsible for all the clean coal misleading advertisements and getting so many elected leaders to buy into this mistruth. The Tea Party is definitely very much linked up with the coal industry, and right now we can see our democracy is hurt very, very much. The coal industries are responsible for us not having any significant climate legislation in the U.S. And finally, the war on workers. I know that the conversation has been pit workers against the environment, but Peabody Coal is backing out of all of their agreements with the United Mine Workers. And the United Mine Workers have been protesting for months and getting arrested because they no longer have retirement plans under Peabody Coal anymore. So all of this kind of connects together, right? And then, we're also, I think a bunch of people in here are, worried about genetically modified food and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and all of this is about big corporations having a hold on our democracy. And coal exports gives a lifeline to the coal industry, who is one of the biggest players in having a stranglehold on our government. And we have an opportunity to shake that, at least one of these big beasts. We just celebrated retiring the 150th coal plant on Monday. Really exciting. It's really exciting. When we started this campaign, we were fighting new proposals. In around 2004, 2005 is when the Sierra Club began its Beyond Coal campaign. And it was in direct response to Dick Cheney's 2001 energy plan, which was, let's build a bunch of coal plants and we'll get off of foreign energy that way. And so we set out to oppose every single coal plant. And we stopped nearly 200 coal plants from being built in this country. And in 2009, we said, okay, We need to start closing down existing coal plants. If we're ever going to have any real effect on protecting people's health and protecting our climate, we have to stop using coal. And it started right here in the Northwest. The first two coal plants to announce retirement were in Oregon and Washington, and then also in Colorado. So this area led the way, and we just celebrated 150 of them closed. Really cool, really cool.
Where was the one that closed?
Massachusetts, for those who didn't hear. I just was so excited about it, I didn't even look. So we're making really great strides here in America. It is a direct result of this. That is why they are trying to export this coal, because they cannot sell it to us anymore. And what is the point of all this progress if we're just going to turn around and ship our pollution overseas to other people and still burn up our climate and still burn up our oceans? And so it really comes down to, who do we trust with our future? So these are some of the big players in this fight. I put some pictures of a couple people because there's been some interesting investigative journalism that's been happening recently. So this is Laura Hennessy, and she's with the Alliance for Northwest Jobs and Exports. She's the PR person for the coal export folks. And this guy is Matthew Ferguson with Arch Coal. And they were having a conversation in a hallway at a big energy conference where Lori got up and talked about how hard it is to build a coal export terminal in the Northwest. And so he came up to her afterwards, and they're, kibitzing, and a journalist recorded it. And so I just wanted to give you a little snippet of it, just so you can get a taste of what they're saying behind closed doors about us, right? So Lori was talking about how she worked with the APA. She said, I pulled that out in the right crowds. Because in the Northwest, that's a good thing, right? But it's funny, because I never really went out of my way to mention it to our Alliance board before. And one day I was quoted in the paper because, again, I was speaking to an audience in Seattle, and I was like, well, of course we're concerned about climate change. Everyone's concerned about climate change. But what we're saying is this isn't going to contribute to climate change. That in itself, right? She goes, but then somebody from Peabody got on the call, and it was my second week on the job, and she said, you were quoted saying coal's worried about climate change? We don't believe in climate change. And I remember I was on the phone and I was like, I can't say that in Seattle. They both start laughing. And Matt Ferguson from Arch Coal goes, yeah, we're not worried about it. And our second Arch Coal rep, unnamed, said, yeah, you can say that in St. Louis, but you can't say that in Seattle. And Matt goes, yeah, it's not going to happen. And Lori continues, yeah, I can't say that in Seattle. And I remember she just goes, wow, we really do have different regions, don't we? And Matt Ferguson says, I think what you do, this is what you say. You're trying to help people out of poverty in the Far East. Yeah. And she said, exactly. And I did that. And Matt Ferguson replies, do they not deserve to enjoy prosperity like we have? Don't be so selfish, you jerks. And then they laugh. Prosperity or pollution? And 1% or 99%? What are they talking about when they talk about the prosperity that we are having? So all those people in the slide before are the same ones that are bringing you this. They are bringing you the housing and economic collapse. Goldman Sachs is the primary funder behind the Cherry Point terminal. They are bringing you coal ash, sludge pond spills in the eastern part of the U.S. That's the TVA spill. Bringing you arresting union workers because they're fighting for their pension and their health benefits that they were promised after they worked in the mines for 40 years. They're bringing us coal train derailments right here in our state. This happened last year in Mesa, Washington. Imagine that happening on the Puget Sound. And they're bringing you a record of pollution. And they haven't been paying for that pollution for the last 100 years. This is truly the 99 versus the 1%. So Mayor alluded to some of this. I mean, he's right. People are rising up in China, and even when you're not in a democratic society, leaders get a little nervous when you have 30,000 people protesting a new coal plant being built in your neighborhood, right? So this was in 2011. 30,000 people came out. Can you imagine that? That's turnout. That is turnout. And that was the first time China said, okay, we won't build a coal plant. They actually responded. So now people, I think, are getting real brave. And you're starting to see a lot of unrest in China. This is pollution from last year. I mean, they can't even see 30 feet in front of them. So this year has marked some interesting moves from China. They announced a carbon tax in February. And then just last month, 3 of their major business regions, Beijing and Shanghai, and I can't remember the third one, Guangdong, have all announced that they will not build a single new coal plant ever again, and that they are going to reduce their emissions by 10% by 2017. Can you imagine our government doing that? That would be awesome. So they're making the change. Now, I'm not trying to say they're perfect. We're not perfect. They're not perfect. But the shift is happening. And we have allies around the world that are really working to make sure that this does not happen. It's happening in India, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Canada, it's happening in the southeast of America. It's really inspiring to see the international movement against burning fossil fuels, and especially coal. And we are fed up, and we're not going to take it anymore. So these are pictures from the hearing in Longview that just happened in September. Longview, one could say, would be a really hard place to have a really great hearing against coal exports, but we did an amazing job. About 1,000 people came out, and about, I'm being told 2,000, I'll say 1,500. We'll break it even, how about that? And overwhelmingly against coal exports in Longview. And this wasn't like the opposition tried to say, a bunch of people being bussed in. This was Longview people. Now, of course, there were people being bussed in because they're concerned about their own impacts as well. They were people in the gorge and all along the rail line. But this was primarily a community event. And I just wanted to do some of the highlights. This is Skype testimony from Australia. A woman in Newcastle talking to the regulators and the people in that room that she lives in a coal town, and trust her, you do not want to live in a coal town. We have ranchers from Montana, and just a lot of community members across the region. And right now, as we speak, there's over 500 people testifying against coal exports in Vancouver, Washington. And so again, this is kind of about a bigger picture, right? There's so much happening right now. The one thing I was like doing all this outreach about coal exports and the hearings and what's going on, it's like we're kind of butting up against each other because there's so much going on. So right now, Jay Inslee is about to start doing climate hearings across the state for his climate legislative agenda for next year. The EPA, on the heels of Obama's announcement of a carbon rule, is now doing hearings across the country to find out what we want in that. And tomorrow, the Utilities and Transportation Committee are going to hear whether or not we should stop burning coal, that PSC should stop burning coal in Montana for power in Washington. So there's a lot happening, and I think it's really exciting to see all of this work coming together and a nexus around the climate movement here in Washington and beyond. And this is your time to say, I'm concerned about climate. I am concerned about ocean acidification. I am concerned about my children's future. We got a broad, robust study out of the Cherry Point terminal because thousands of people came out and demanded it. And we have to do it again if we're going to get it again. Because trust me, I have been a lot of places listening to a lot of big executives complaining about how Department of Ecology is out on a limb. They are going it alone. That was one of the ones I heard. I love this one, that we're having eco-imperialism is controlling our state government. So they're getting some some pushback. So we got to be there to have their back, because it's amazing what ecology did. And it's amazing that the Army Corps didn't, right? And so we have to have our back for our folks here in the state. And so to that end, I'm really encouraging you guys to attend this hearing. You know, I've heard a lot. I know it's in Tacoma and it's at 5 and the traffic's terrible and da-da-da-da-da. This is so important, though. I mean, people all over the world are dying for their own democracy, right? We have an opportunity to drive to Tacoma and demand it, right? And so there's a rally at 3:30 at the little plaza right outside the convention center. We have sign-up sheets for getting a bus. We have a bus coming out of the Seattle Sierra Club office, and so we can give you more information about that. But I really encourage you all to participate in this process, because this is probably going to be the last hearing we have for a while, maybe a couple of years. So this is a real opportunity, last opportunity to get in some of your concerns about these issues. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Chris Wilke is with the Puget Soundkeeper.
Thanks, Robin. That was a great presentation. So I'm Chris Wilke. I'm your Puget Soundkeeper with the organization Puget Soundkeeper Alliance. And I thought what I would do, I don't have a prepared presentation, I just have a few talking points. But what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about how we got involved in this fight. And I think it's significant in part because of the level of specialization that our organization had decided we could be most effective in trying to protect and preserve Puget Sound. And we were formed in 1984 as the Puget Sound Alliance. At that time, we were the first nonprofit organization to focus on the health of Puget Sound. We worked really hard on a number of issues. Our first victory was securing a secondary sewage treatment plant for the city of Seattle. In 1984, at that point, what was proposed was a primary treatment system only, which would have been illegal under the Clean Water Act. But if you are familiar with sewage treatment, primary treatment is roughly equivalent to screening out the floaters. It was not sufficient for a city of 500,000 people. So we were successful in that effort, and we established the first Puget Sound management plan at the state level. And we were very focused on water quality. And ever since then, we've maintained that focus. That's been our mission. We can't get involved in too many issues because there's not too many people working on water quality. And so we kept our focus on that. In 1990, we joined an organization that was rapidly growing. At the time, there was a couple of riverkeeper organizations on the East Coast, the Hudson Riverkeeper, the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper down in Atlanta. There was a San Francisco Bay Keeper, and there was already a Soundkeeper. We became the second Soundkeeper, and there were 6 organizations that formed the National Association of Riverkeepers, Baykeepers, and Soundkeepers. Since then, we have grown this movement and we've shortened our name. So it is now the Waterkeeper Alliance. It's a worldwide organization of 209 advocates, each based in a watershed that patrols our watershed with a boat and is willing to enforce the clean water, or whatever their clean water laws are. And we've done so in our watershed 150 times with successful Citizen Clean Water Act lawsuits. So that's basically our mission. It's water quality, it's Clean Water Act enforcement, it's education, we do beach cleanups, but it's all about improving the water. When I attended a National Waterkeeper Alliance meeting in 2009 in New York, we got to meet Bill Clinton. And the theme of that conference basically was climate change. And we had a number of people come talk to us, James Hansen of NASA, and Bill Clinton came and spoke to us. And what he said, a couple things that a couple people said, but one thing that Bill Clinton said that really stuck in my mind was, you could win every battle on the water quality issue, but if you lose the war on climate, the protecting climate, basically you lose the war. And it's sea level rise, it's ocean acidification. Some of these topics were just starting to come out at that point. The other thing that I take away from that conference was Dr. James Hansen, formerly of NASA, who was in fact leaving that conference to go get arrested protesting mountaintop removal in Appalachia. But he mentioned something about coal that I had never thought about before. And this is before we had coal export terminals proposed for the Northwest, that the scale of coal burning worldwide is so large that, and it's such a dominant factor for climate change, we could actually burn up every drop of liquid fuels on this planet, throw in natural gas, all the petroleum, and we would still avert the worst effects of climate change if we could somehow get off of coal now. So, I mean, this really puts things in perspective. You're not going to save the world by driving a Prius or riding your bicycle or riding public transportation. We have got to make this larger policy decision to get off of coal, and that is why this work is so important. There's a lot of scientific trends which you can plot out on a graph, and if you kind of squint at it, maybe you can see the trend that they're talking about, but there's so much noise in the system that's difficult to spot. This here is a NOAA map, a NOAA chart of rising CO2 levels from 1960 to 2011. It's a pretty linear chart. This is taken from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which is the furthest away you can get from other sources of carbon dioxide. So this is atmospheric carbon dioxide. It does go up and down every year. Up, down, up, but the trend is very, very straight, slightly increasing, but pretty much a straight line. You don't see too many charts like that. We are at now 400 parts per million of global carbon dioxide, and the safe level that we've already determined, many of you have heard this, is 350 parts per million. So we've actually past the danger zone, but there are extra layers and are where it does get worse. There's a built-in lag in this system. We are seeing the 400 parts per million that we're seeing right now is from carbon that was burned in the 1970s and 1980s. There's a 20-year lag in the system. So if we stop burning carbon today, which is virtually impossible to come to an abrupt stop, we will continue to see it get worse for another 20 years. So that was an eye-opening experience, but what did it actually mean to us here in Puget Sound? What can we do about it? We're a water quality group. Are we going to stop working on water quality to work on climate change because it's so big and so important? It didn't somehow make enough sense to us in 2009. We explored some options, so maybe we can partner with the Sierra Club and Climate Solutions and tag along on some of their stuff. Until we started to learn about a phenomenon called ocean acidification. How many people are familiar with the topic of ocean acidification? It's a very astute audience. The Eastern Pacific and the Pacific Northwest of the United States is on the front line. We are the laboratory for ocean acidification. Our waters are more acidic here than anywhere else on Earth. And it's already affecting the viability of our food chain here. As this plays out over the next few decades, we're going to find that over 50% of the species in our ecosystem here are adversely affected. So if we were looking for a tie between climate change and water quality, we now have it. And it is it's economic loss. We're not just talking about saving these obscure fishes that no one will ever see. This actually affects our most commercially valuable species. Our shellfish industry, as Robin already alluded to, they're looking, at least one grower has moved his hatchery operation to Hawaii. The other ones are looking at ways that they can put buffers in seawater so that they can actually get the baby oysters to settle on the shells, because the seawater itself that we're pumping out of Puget Sound is too corrosive to grow oysters. And that's fine for an industry that's trying to adapt. They can fly to Hawaii or they can put in buffers. But what about the food chain itself? It's really based on these tiny calcium carbonate shell-forming organisms like the pteropods, the crab larvae, and a number of these things. And ultimately, it's our salmon are going to depend on the health of the entire food chain, and ultimately orca whales that are swimming in the San Juan Islands and the Straits. They need salmon. So this is all really tied in. Now, it sounds pretty bleak, and when you really look at the numbers, it does sound bleak, but nature is very resilient, and it's not going to be, a curtain that drops all at once. We need to build as much resilience into the system to slow this down, to work on other forms of water quality protection so we can get this going. So that's some of the environmental aspects. The other thing that Robin asked me to talk about is what are we doing about this? And there's a number of things. We have basically a twofold or two-step strategy. And one, as you all know, is to oppose new fossil fuel exports. And there's a lot of talk about coal. We have the hearings coming up later this month, but it's also oil. They are proposing to make, not only on top of the coal, they're proposing to build 8 new oil terminals to export North Dakota crude and send that away as well. And that may be a bigger immediate risk for Puget Sound if we had a spill of a 125-car oil train moving along the shoreline. That could be very immediately catastrophic. So we are looking at oil, we're looking at coal, we are opposing the expansion of export terminals. We're joining with the Sierra Club and the partners with Power Pass Coal on those fronts. And we're also looking at the problem of existing coal that is leaving the Powder River Basin, and it's coming through our communities now on its way to the Far East. And it's a fraction of what we would see if the terminals are approved. But essentially what we've done is we got together with Robin and some of her people about 2 years ago, and we started talking, well, what about these coal trains that are coming through? Could we be losing coal? Could we go find it? Could we put out a basket and stand under a train and catch it? And one of our volunteers went to the very first place she looked. She went under the Burke-Gilman Trail in Ballard and looked down and picked up coal underneath the rail bridge. There it was. We didn't need 100 different sites to find out if there was a problem. Well, what does that mean? We got coal on a bicycle path. As it turns out, through some research, that the Clean Water Act prohibits any discharge to the nation's waters from a point source. And a point source is just defined as a discrete conveyance, and like a pipe. Well, there's other forms of point sources, and it so happens they have in their definition, in the Federal Clean Water Act, a point source is, one of the definitions is rolling stock. And if a coal car is not rolling stock, I don't know what is. And as it turns out, a 125-car train is 125 point sources, and 4 trains a day is basically, what's my math there, 600 point sources a day, crossing 75 waterways in Washington State. I'm lost on the math now, but that's an awful lot of Clean Water Act violations. Now, this could be made legal if they were issued a permit to discharge this, but they don't have a permit. So this is earlier this spring, the Sierra Club, Puget Soundkeeper, Spokane River Keeper, Columbia River Keeper, our North Sound Bay Keeper, National Resources Defense Council, and Friends of the Gorge, I think I have everybody, filed a case in federal court against Burlington Northern Railway for violations of the Clean Water Act. And this is not going to stop the terminals from being built, but this is to let people know that these uncovered coal cars that are losing 500 to 3,000 pounds of coal per car, somewhere along the journey between Wyoming and Canada, a good portion of that's falling off the cars here in Washington State. That's not legal, and you know, they either need to cover these cars or find some method of controlling it. They have a sticky substance right now they spray on it called a surfactant. It's kind of like the dispersants they put on the oil in the Gulf. It doesn't really solve the problem. It's not 100% effective. So they're going to have to cover these cars or do something, and it will reflect the true cost of transporting coal in it. So it's not going to be the silver bullet that solves all this, but this is something that we're doing here locally to protect our waters in the context of this greater discussion. So I probably can have a few minutes here if anybody has any questions about what I've said.